Hello and welcome to AEW.1, the AEW Women's Division blog. My name is Travis. You can read more of our articles at AEW.1. Hit me up on Twitter at AEW_1. That's ONE. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel. It makes us feel too sweet. All right, let's get into it. So this is an audio version of an article we have up online called AEW's Great and Vexing Women's Division. Just as a disclaimer, just bear with me. I will get to the point. This article was something of a meandering stream of consciousness that waffles back and forth between praise and criticism. I promise you I will get to the point. When AEW launched in 2019, Tony Khan had a mere 2 hours of weekly television to produce with essentially a skeleton crew of a roster. It all felt very tidy and economical. Audiences quickly got to know who all the players were that we basically saw everyone every couple of weeks, and no one felt lost in the shuffle or in creative purgatory. And this is a point I'll keep coming back to. We underestimate just how much satisfaction and comfort wrestling fans deride in the harmony of a well-defined cast that you can count on seeing in predictable, regular intervals. A compact roster and limited commitment for creative output left Tony Khan with an overabundance of time to brainstorm and discuss ideas, and even come up with some alternatives, sometimes better than the original direction, when they needed to pivot or course correct. Long-term storytelling felt in full effect. AEW had seemingly nailed down an excellent and sustainable operating model which saw them coast to being a ratings and critical success, even during a pandemic. But to misquote Jeff Goldblum in Jurassic Park, capitalism finds a way. A lot of fans would say AEW's hottest peak was during a time when Rampage was added and the roster began expanding rapidly. But today, with 5 hours of weekly television, plus Ring of Honor, and a bloated roster, that overabundance of time and creative energy that AEW enjoyed previously feels long gone. Between an AEW that has more than doubled in size, the Jacksonville Jaguars and Fulham FC, it's impossible for Tony Khan's admittedly impressive, but already stretched capacity not to become even thinner. Now don't get it twisted. On the balance, I honestly prefer 2024 AEW to anything that has come before it. The highs that we get from this all-timer of a roster are just too good to pass up. Despite my reservations about how nebulous and disorganized this company often feels, I prefer it. But 2019 AEW had its strong points as well. If AEW in 2019 was a single wheel, moving at a steady and predictable pace for which you could leisurely plot out its road ahead, AEW in 2024 is like several runaway wheels, all traveling at different speeds, which you must continually jog ahead of to kick sticks and rocks out of its path. And I'm not saying that makes for bad television in isolation, but as I said before, wrestling fans, actually, let's chalk it up to human beings in general. We are uncomfortable with ambiguity, and maybe that's a human failing. Maybe we'd all be better balanced people if we learned how to tolerate a little more chaos, but short of re-educating your audience, that's not the industry AEW is in. So what does this preamble have to do with AEW's women's division? The overwhelming sentiment online these days is to praise the work AEW has done with its women's division. People laud the storytelling and matches and the character work. And when I look at AEW's women's division in 2024, it kind of reflects how the men's division looked in 2019. In 2019, we got 4 to 5 men's matches per week, not including Dark. Today, we get 3 to 5 women's matches across Dynamite, Collision, and Rampage. In 2019, while there was over 40 men on the roster, you could sort of track them in alignments, such as tag teams, stables, bodyguards. So in a way, it felt like there was like 20-ish alignments or entities that you could track. Today, AEW's women's division, with a lot fewer alignments, has 15-ish of these entities that I'd consider in rotation on the active roster. AEW has somewhat synthesized a version of the wrestlers to matches balance that they enjoyed in 2019, compartmentalized completely within the women's division.
This has made for a well-defined roster that sees enough action that they reliably appear every week, but not so often that anyone feels overexposed. But this would all fall apart if the creative was mediocre. Tony Khan cannot dedicate as much time in 2024 to just the women's division than he did in 2019 to all of AEW. But thankfully, he seems to have assembled the right creative minds. I can't know exactly how the division of labor is distributed, but from listening to various reports and sources on the topic, Tony Khan has his claws deeply entrenched in the All About Mariah storyline, one of my favorites of all time. And along with RJ City, who seems to be kind of a right-hand man on that project. Jen Pepperman sounds like she's working in step with Mercedes Moné on her creative, and as VP of Content Development, I'm sure her fingerprints are everywhere on AEW storytelling. And Will Washington has been credited for his input on the Willow and Statlander feud. The level of detail and care in the creative makes it self-evident that whoever is working on it wasn't rushed to churn out content, but rather had time to gestate on creative pitches and allow for ideas to formulate organically. Whatever the full picture of the creative delegations behind the scenes, they're objectively doing a great job, telling stories both week to week and long term. With all of that having been said, however, this harmonious balance between a well-defined active roster and its critically acclaimed creative output comes at a price. I regularly put out and update an infographic on Twitter displaying AEW's entire women's roster, including AEW, Ring of Honor, and those who are inactive, whether that's due to injury, maternity leave, or unexplained absence. You can almost break it into thirds where close to 1/3 of the roster shows up on AEW TV, 1/3 has been sloughed off onto Ring of Honor, and a third are inactive. Now, this may speak solely to my own sensibilities, where I like an operation to be tight and efficient with very little waste. But I look at AEW's women's division like two rooms side by side. One is a beautifully furnished room where every piece of furniture and fixture are both practical and beautiful, situated exactly in the right spot. The second room looks like a storage container with furniture covering every square inch of the floor, stacked to the ceiling. Does that matter though? They say you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs, or don't let perfection be the enemy of good. Whatever cliche you wish to employ. When you take stock of everything, AEW's television deal is what makes the whole thing run. So, as long as AEW prioritizes quality television across Dynamite, Collision, and Rampage, can I really criticize Tony Khan for giving jobs to twice as many wrestlers as he uses on TV? In most cases, he'll allow them to moonlight for other promotions while under AEW contracts, so it's not like they can't wrestle at all. I can certainly understand if a wrestler isn't happy about not being used on TV, but it is Tony Khan's prerogative as long as he's paying them. But shrinking that on-screen roster isn't the only consideration. I stated earlier that we get 3 to 5 women's matches per week on AEW TV, and that's a very recent development that won't necessarily be sustained, as we've had multiple collisions with multiple women's matches. Hopefully that is a trend that continues. But on the flagship show, Dynamite, we get one women's match 99% of the time. Paradoxically though, AEW's women's division is thriving on this balance of matches. Featuring fewer women has made the roster feel more defined and easier to conceptualize, and limiting the number of matches not only prevents anyone from feeling overexposed in the ring, but it maintains a pleasant pace for each storyline. Storylines in the women's division seldom feel too drawn out. We're not getting matches for the sake of matches, but maybe all this falls apart if we aren't getting so many non-wrestling segments for each storyline. Despite my constant reservations about how few women's matches we get on Dynamite, when 10:05 p.m. rolls around on a Wednesday night, nearly every storyline has had some sort of meaningful and or interesting progression, whether it's a backstage promo, an in-ring segment, or a vignette, especially in Toni Storm's case. The women's division is undeniably receiving focus. But what's odd about this return to a more 2019-ish practices in the women's division is it scans as the antithesis of the more is more approach that we see in the men's division, which has a roster that feels incredibly nebulous and lacking definition. The men's roster is like a revolving door attached to a packed lobby, just scooping out bodies indiscriminately from this enormous bullpen of talent on the whim of a match graphic. And that's not including all the wrestlers we get from New Japan, CMLL, and wherever Tommy Billington is from. There's an insatiable appetite for adding male wrestlers and getting them onto TV in short order. Whereas with the women, AEW seems like they practice the appropriate amount of restraint. They'll pass on a female wrestler if they don't feel like they have the right spot for them, or in Camille's case, they'll sign her up and keep her on the bench for months until the right spot and the right storyline opens up. I'm presuming this, mind you, she hasn't debuted yet. Men's Ring of Honor champions get featured regularly on Dynamite and feel as much a part of the AEW roster as anyone else. Women's Ring of Honor champions, however, Athena and Billie Starkz, are essentially Honor Club exclusives that you never see on AEW television. Men's championships have been added to open up spots on AEW TV. When you factor in all the AEW belts for men between AEW, Ring of Honor, and the FTW title, there are 15 spots for men to hold and defend titles. Given, as I've said, that we don't see the ROH Women's Champions on AEW television, that is just 2 belts, keeping open 2 spots for 2 women across Dynamite, Collision, and Rampage. It's with some degree of cynicism that I must ask, what percentage of the positive aspects that we're experiencing with the booking of AEW's women's division are a bug and not a feature? How much of the benefits are simply incidental byproducts born out of inequity? Given how these practices are good enough for the women, but not for me, the men, I have to ask these questions. I will offer this one benefit of the doubt, however. Very recently, before Mercedes Moné had come in and before Mariah May's story had really kicked off, AEW's women's division had a very extensive list of women out with injuries. So, if it was Tony Khan's intention to build or rebuild a strong foundation of featured women and storylines before adding to it, this is what it would look like. And with Britt Baker finally having returned, I'll be watching to see if she is added to what we currently have, or if she just replaces someone and pushes them down. And when Jamie Hayter returns, that will be another big domino to watch for as well. And as I look at all the women AEW employs, whether they are sequestered to Ring of Honor or currently inactive, it's not hard to find plenty of women who could be brought into the fray over the coming year. I'd also like to see this booking strategy that AEW is using in their women's division applied company-wide while we're at it. What do you think? You can let me know in the comments or hit me up on Twitter at AW_1. That's AW_ONE. Thanks for watching, and as always, remember to let the women in your life know how much you appreciate them.